Since the subject of today's video is haunted porcelain. Oh, he looks so neglected. We've got Leroy with us today to ward off the stank of this movie. This is all gonna make a lot more sense if you watch the first video I did on it, on the first movie. Although, when it comes to The Boy 2, the original lore from the first is so finangled and cut up and scrapped and torn to pieces that they could work as two standalone movies, pretty much. So maybe you're not missing out on anything. Maybe what you're missing out on is a kiss from Leroy. The second movie really massacres the first, and you'll see what I mean. You'll see what I mean. It's quite a trip. In The Boy 2, we're introduced because these characters have nothing to do with the first movie, you know. There's no Greta and Malcolm, unfortunately. Which I guess makes more sense, but when it comes to Brahms...
And apparently there's a bunch of people who find him so hot. What?
Anywho, the family of Liza, the mom, Sean, the dad, and Jude, the 12-year-old son, they originally live in London, but they experience or are subject to a home invasion one night, which scars the mom and son so bad that, the mom has night terrors and the son has gone mute and has to write on a little notepad to communicate. So since they're so traumatized by it, they decide to move farther out into the country where they'll feel safer. Except this new safe place they move to is the guest house on the Hillshires' old property. A guest house pretty close to the main house where the first movie occurred. So yeah, that just screams safe, doesn't it? Pretty much as soon as they arrive at the guest house, or their new house, their kid Jude is kind of drawn out to the woods and drawn to this little buried object with a little hand sticking out of the ground. And guess what that little object is? Surprise, surprise, it's Brahms, the doll. That would be bad if they found the human Brahms buried and dug him up. It's that creepy little porcelain atrocity from the first one. At least they have some connection somewhere, right? And if finding Brahms buried out in the woods wasn't creepy enough, he still has that list of rules with him that he wanted Greta to follow. So he's a man of conviction, or a boy of conviction. Porcelain, boy of conviction. Anyway, the mom lets him keep it, she cleans it up, and then Jude starts getting overly attached to it and has to take the doll Brahms everywhere with him, and for some reason the doll Brahms is insistent on Jude taking them both out to the woods. But on one romp to the woods when Jude has Brahms but the mom is there, they come across the groundsman Joseph, who has a dog with him, who obviously hates the doll and is barking at it because, I wonder why that is. It's in every doll movie, there's a dog that hates the haunted doll, okay? And the groundsman's a little sus and he acts a little weird when he sees Brahms, and he's just kind of creepy in general. He's a groundsman. They're all weird. The mom, Liza, starts growing concerned about how close Jude and Brahms are getting, and how Jude, he can't go anywhere without him and is very dependent on Brahms' company. And like I said, Jude has been mute since the home invasion incident, but the parents, Liza and Sean, overhear Jude talking to Brahms, speaking, for the first time in a long time through the closed door of his room. So they're obviously stoked about that, but even then, he only speaks to Brahms, and he continues writing to his parents. Which I would be kind of pissed about, because I'm like, oh, you can speak, huh? Oh, you can speak, and only to the doll that you met, last week? And, in the typical vein of haunted doll movie, Brahms gets a little more shady, dare I say a little more bold. He makes Jude add a few more rules to his rule list, such as Brahms has to eat at the table with the family, and that Jude has to always be around Brahms. So it just sounds like Brahms is a possessive control freak. Strange, disturbing things start happening around the house, or start getting worse, culminating in disturbing, murderous, explicit drawings of Jude murdering his family, but they're drawn in his notepad. But since most people don't assume that dolls are haunted, I'm not one of them. His parents, Liza and Sean, just blame all this bad behavior, obviously, on the one other person in the house, Jude, who's also a little disturbed from the home invasion, so it kind of clicks into place. And Jude's personality starts shifting. He starts getting darker and somehow more quiet, even though he just writes on the notebook. But we also see in that same notebook a different type of handwriting. Brahms is communicating to him through the notebook. Ew. And am I the only one who expected a, pretty ancient Victorian doll to have nice handwriting? That's chicken scratch, Brahms. That's almost as bad as Jude's. And some more bad news. Joseph, the creepy groundsman, his dog goes missing, but then he finds it fairly shortly thereafter, and it's dead in the woods and it's been gutted. But as Jude grows closer and more dependent and weird around the doll, the parents grow more sick of it, and more so the mom than anything. But the mom convinces the dad to have kind of a doll intervention and to take Brahms away. So early one morning, they go into Jude's room, but they find it to be empty. Jude is gone, and worse, more so, Brahms the doll is gone. And on the bed, there's Jude's notepad. And in Jude's handwriting, it says, "You should have followed the rules." Because, Brahms is a stickler for the rules. That's something we learned in the first one, except it was the human Brahms that was enforcing them, really. Or so we think. Frantic, the parents search around the woods for them, and then over to the main Hillshire house, which has the door open, so I think you found where dude went. And it's just Liza who comes into the house, but as soon as she steps in, she hears a little, like, pitter-patter of porcelain footsteps, from somewhere far upstairs, and she hears little whispers and stuff, so she assumes she's found where they are. So she goes through the house and ends up going through Brahms, the human Brahms' old wall passages with, all the notes up from the first one. She makes her way into Brahms' childhood bedroom, which is the upstairs area, to find Brahms sitting on the bed, the doll. There is no human Brahms in this movie. Sorry to disappoint, okay? But speaking of human Brahms, in this very moment, Jude kind of recreates that iconic human Brahms entrance from the first movie, where he, like, sticks his hand out first, like this. You know what I mean? Sticks his hand out from behind a door and slowly creeps his way out. And he's wearing the human Brahms porcelain mask. So this is all types of weird. And Jude says all eerily, like, I didn't mean to scare you, Mommy. We were just playing. Like, that just screams possessed right now. I don't know. Except this is the first time Jude has spoken to Liza, the mom, in a long time. So she kind of ignores the fact about the creepy circumstances and Jude briefly going MIA. She's like, oh, you spoke to me. Oh my gosh. And then the dad and the groundskeeper, Joseph, show up, and, the dad's also flummoxed by the fact that Jude is talking again. And this is where the groundskeeper, Joseph, reveals to the parents the actual history of the Hillshires and this particular, massive mansion house, and, all of the fun stuff that took place inside of it, but apparently stuff that happened a long time ago. So they're saying that the first movie was a long time ago compared to now. But when Joseph is explaining that, Brahms killed someone, Cole, and tried to kill 2 others, Malcolm and Greta, he also reveals that in that whole mess of a situation that Brahms died. So he did succumb to his injuries that Greta gave him. Or at least the second movie's claiming that. I'm sorry to break it to the Brahms fandom, but he died in the first, apparently, according to the second movie. Now everything's hunky-dory again, and, Jude's speaking. The parents invite family members over, maybe they're like siblings or whatever. It's aunts and uncles, and they bring a few cousins of Jude's over. 2, seemingly a brother and a sister, except the boy's a little asshole, okay? So the 3 kids go outside and are kind of forced to play together, except the little asshole cousin is being an asshole. Oh, who would have guessed? To Jude and calling him mental, and then he talks to dolls, and, of course Brahms is out there sitting on the swing watching. The doll again. Not the human one. Anyway, so the asshole cousin is mocking and jeering Jude. Then he steals his sister's hat. And then Jude and the asshole cousin are kind of at a tug-of-war with it. Except Jude kind of looks over to Brahms. Like, Brahms is giving him an idea. And Jude sees a sharp stake sticking out of the ground, like a wooden stake. So he lets go of the hat on purpose so that the asshole cousin falls back and impales himself on it. But, unfortunately, the cousin lives because the stake kind of goes through his shoulder, which is going to be a lifetime of shoulder issues, but he deserves that. Anyway, after the family's kind of rushed the asshole cousin off to the emergency room and all the family's left, I guess they want nothing to do with them now, Jude says to his mom, like, the doll is getting stronger, he won't let me go. And, obviously the mom is disconcerted by this, but she still doesn't believe that Brahms, the doll, is haunted, because, most people don't, but Leroy's haunted, so I'm a believer. And then the mom looks up the serial number that Brahms has on his foot, and looks at his extensive history of horror. She's able to trace back through his warpath of carnage and terror and massacre, because all of Brahms' previous owners, dating way back, have been logged and kept track of. Who's recording that? And through these records, she realizes that whoever owns Brahms, most of their family's killed off, or their friends, or just someone in their life is killed by a boy in their family. Brahms seems to attach himself to young boys. So it's the young boy of whatever family owns him that ends up doing some heinous act and killing one of his family members or killing someone. And then she scrolls to an article about the Hillshires, because, they were obviously a past owner of the doll Brahms, the last owners. And there's a picture of the mom, Brahms the human, and the doll sitting right next to Brahms. So by that, it's implied that the human Brahms boy was under the influence of the doll. Remember when he killed that one girl from the first movie? It's implied here that the Brahms doll had the human Brahms under his control. So it kind of dices up the narrative from the first movie that the human Brahms was just a psychotic little boy who went crazy and killed someone because he's a psychopath, which I kind of prefer. Saying that he was just possessed by a haunted doll, it kind of ruins things. I don't know. Because then why is adult human Brahms psycho himself? Like, did the possession never end or something? I guess he still has a doll in the house. Maybe he's still under the influence? I don't know. This movie raises more questions than it puts to bed, so now that Liza has seen this, she's starting to believe that, oh, maybe there is something wrong with the Brahms doll. So she goes to find Jude and Brahms, except they're missing again, and this time when she goes to Jude's room to search for them, she's met by the barrel of a shotgun held by Joseph. I told you he was shady, and I knew from the beginning, okay? Joseph has like this weird brainwash connection to the doll where he sees himself as its protector, and apparently Joseph, the random groundskeeper who was not in the first movie, was the one you see at the very end of the first boy. Because apparently, according to the second movie, Brahms died after Greta stabbed him. So in the end, when you see someone putting the doll back together, apparently that's Joseph, who was kind of called or drawn to the grounds by the spirit of Brahms and put him back together and is now his protector or something. Except in that final scene, we see the sleeve of that sassy cardigan that Brahms was wearing, human Brahms. So I was like, are the writers pretending that they weren't trying to make that seem like it was Brahms, the human? You know what I mean? It just seemed like a big cut up and stitch over of a plot hole. Anyway, Joseph continues in his villain spiel, his villain monologue, and says, you know, Brahms is drawn to damaged people, people who need him, people who need that kind of comfort, as if a haunted, possessed, cursed doll is comforting. Let me tell you firsthand, it's not. And Joseph also says that Jude was meant to find Brahms, and that's why Brahms wanted him to bury him, so Jude could find him. Even though it'd be easier just to leave the doll in the guest house as opposed to burying him out in the woods. Like, how is that a given that Jude's gonna find him? I don't know. But Liza incapacitates Joseph by throwing candle wax in his face, and having just watched House of Wax, that kind of gave me PTSD. And anyway, she takes his gun and runs over to the main house to try to find Jude. And once she's made it to the main house, she finds Jude wearing that human Brahms porcelain mask, holding Brahms the doll, in front of an open furnace behind him. She tries to talk Jude down and even gets him to hand her Brahms, but Jude's obviously under the influence of something, and I don't mean illicit substances, something worse. Brahms, or the spirit of the doll. And then Jude gets hold of the shotgun and is about to shoot his mom, pretty much, under the influence of Brahms, until Sean, the dad, comes and smashes the hell out of the doll's face. Kind of like the first one, except there's something underneath it now. And then Joseph appears out of nowhere and is horrified, like, what have you done? The doll's gonna come after me now, he's gonna blame me, I was his protector. And while that does sound like paranoid rantings, the doll actually does come for him. And like there's a huge furnace swell and the flame shoots out and throws Joseph against a wall and kills him, I guess. Underneath the doll's broken porcelain face, ew, it's like a demon underneath. I don't know what that is, a demon child, a demon doll child? It's possessed by something. That ain't no normal porcelain doll. Ew, what if that's what's under Leroy's face? Well, only one way to find out. Just kidding. I would never, Leroy, I would never. But I guess since the doll's face, Brahms' face, has been smashed, Jude's out of the trance now. He's out of the possession somewhat. So he kind of tricks Brahms and picks him up, but then subsequently tosses him into the open furnace and shuts the door. Anyway, so with the doll Brahms incinerated, hopefully, the family gets the hell out of there and moves away, and they seem to move away in peace and happiness, and all their problems are fixed, and Jude's talking again, and, you know, they've experienced a bigger trauma so they can forget the first home invasion trauma, you know, silver lining. Except while everything seems to be at peace and their new life is great, now that they're free from the Hillshire estate and out of the reach of that porcelain grasp, Jude gets out of bed and puts on the porcelain Brahm mask, the human one, that he apparently brought back from that hellscape, and he puts it on and says into the mirror, "Good night, Brahms. I think we'll like it here, but only if they follow the rules." So is the kid now like a conduit for the spirit of Brahms or the demon of Brahms? I don't know. Maybe by the time the doll was burnt, the spirit of Brahms was already in Jude. I don't know. I don't know because that lore was not in the first movie. And my biggest issue is, if you've seen the first or seen my video on it, The Boy, the first movie, was obviously made to be a standalone movie, a one and done type of movie, you know? And that was obviously for a reason, because the second one that they did not need to make kind of undid all the coolness and uniqueness of the first one. Because the most unique, coolest part of the first movie, the big twist, is that no, the doll is not haunted after all, it's being puppeteered by a giant, hairy, muscly man-child in the walls that everyone thirsts over, and who has his own fandom, but he's a human. It's being influenced by a human. That's the whole twist of the first movie, right? Well, that's completely chopped up and thrown in the trash and burnt, and has had nuclear waste spilled on top of it, and then dumped into a landfill somewhere. It just completely obliterated the first plot. If you view the second movie as like a standalone, it's not that bad of a movie. It's just your typical formulaic haunted doll movie, pretty much. But it's after the first. It's a sequel from a great movie, okay? So it's like, what did you do? Like, what were the writers and directors thinking? Leave it just at the first one. And the writers and directors, whatever, from the first one, obviously meant for Brahms to live. Hence why we see what is obviously his hand with its little, like, musty green cardigan fixing the doll. That's not some random groundskeeper Joseph. That looks like Brahms' hand, I guess. Not that I know what his hands look like, but, It looked like it belonged to him, and we see the sleeve of the green cardigan as he's fixing up Brahms. Also, in the second movie, the doll Brahms, his face is like perfect. He has like tiny, tiny hairline fractures and cracks where he's been put back together. Do we not remember his face turning to actual dust in the first one, though? Sure, they were like actual chunks of his face that broke off, but there was a lot of dust that came from that. Porcelain dust. His face was obliterated, and now it's almost perfectly fine in the second boy. Sure, there's like tiny hairline cracks, but that's not what he would have looked like, okay? Unless Joseph's side hustle is a doll maker when he's not being the groundsman or something. And sure, the second movie did an okay, decent job at explaining away some of the discrepancies they created by creating a second movie that's different from the first. They did a fairly good job of covering their tracks in that way, but along that path, they threw out a lot of the lore and charm from the first movie and kind of upended it. Anywho, in my humble opinion, the second movie, it's okay, again, as a standalone, but as a sequel to the first boy, it kind of just ruins things, and it doesn't continue the things that were good about the first boy. Because I don't think there were things that were meant to be continued. The first boy was meant to be a standalone, a one and done, and that is how it should have remained.